President Trump holding a 2-hour call with Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday, and joining us right now with what a potential peace deal might mean for the energy markets is Dan Yergin. He is S&P Global Vice Chairman. Dan, let's talk a little bit about this. I've kind of been under the impression that Russian oil never really left the global markets, and so as a result, it didn't do that much for oil prices. What would an unwind of that mean?
Well, I think on oil, Russian oil continues to be in the market, and it's priced at a discount. I mean, the real significance would be the return of Russian natural gas to Europe, which is a Putin priority, but something that has been different messages from Washington. But the Europeans, for the mostly, say, we don't want Russian gas. And if Russian gas returned in large volume to Europe, that would be a big hit on U.S. LNG exporters, like affecting about $120 billion of investment. So, and I think the other question is that I don't think that there's this great enthusiasm by Western companies to go back to Russia. The U.S.-Russian Business Council disbanded itself 2 years ago, and there is no indication that that council would want to come together again.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird takeaway from the meeting. I think a lot of people were anticipating that there would be stricter sanctions that were placed on Russia potentially. That's certainly what Senator Lindsey Graham and others had indicated, that if Russia doesn't do some sort of a deal and do a deal rather quickly, that President Trump would put a little more pressure on him instead of kind of kicking things to the Europeans. What's your read on how things stand?
At the end of the call, after the call, Yuri Yushakov, who's the national security advisor to Putin, said they were having such a good time they didn't want to get off the phone. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. But Becky, you're pointing to something that there are really tough sanctions that 70 or 80 senators have signed on to. So, and presumably they're not doing that independently. So holding out that cudgel of sanctions. But at the same time, the president, so many different ways to interpret this. It could walk away, that the Pope should take over the negotiation. But I think the fundamental fact is that Putin doesn't want to negotiate. He wants to get to what he calls root causes. Root causes is the eradication of an independent Ukraine. That's what he wants. And he still thinks that he has time on his side.
What does Europe do in response?
Well, Europe is taking, they've said that they're going to put on more sanctions on Russia. I think it's the 17th package of sanctions on Russia. And the new German chancellor has taken a very firm line. And the Germans are saying, we don't want Russian gas coming back. So the question is, can the Europeans, to what degree can they supplant the United States in supporting Ukraine if the U.S. kind of backs off from it? And that's one of the other messages that President Trump and Vice President Vance indicated, is that maybe they'll just walk away from it or leave it to the Pope.
I guess one of the places the president seems to listen to from time to time would be from American business interests. What do American LNG exporters say? What have they said, and have they lobbied the president on this?
Oh, they've been very clear that Europe is an important market for them. 91% of the LNG that Germany receives comes from the U.S. And their point is, why would we want to give up a very important market to Russian gas? I don't think there's any general, if you look at U.S. business more generally, this isn't like the 1990s or the 2000s when people saw this big Russian market. Companies just would not be, unless it's just trading or of some kind, are not at all drooling excited at the thought of going back to Russia, because there'd be no confidence in what would happen thereafter.
The sanctions that the 70 to 80 senators have signed off on, can those be lifted without the Senate itself taking up that vote?
I think, well, they proposed in a bill. It hasn't been put into effect. And you assume this is coordinated with the administration, Trump sending message, we want to do business with you, or otherwise we're going to hit you hard. But meanwhile, while these discussions are going on, Russia has hit Ukraine with some of the largest drone and missile attacks of the war. So, I mean, for Putin, he just thinks, I think this is a waiting thing. He waits for support to dwindle away and gets what he wants. So that's his game that he's playing. It's a very brutal game.
Is that the end game as you see it over the next year or two?
Well, I think right now the question will be, first of all, whether the Trump administration just gets so peeved with Putin and that they realize that Putin is trying to play them. And
Yeah.
secondly, it's the strength of the Europeans, including the degree to which they can really gear up their own defense industries.